AFR Talk.
You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
And welcome back to Focal Point, AFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. The program is Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on Conservative Talk Radio. The network is AFR Talk, the American Family Radio Talk Network. Looking at a piece here from The Advocate, and I'm going to close the loop on the Fred Phelps story here in just a second. But this is a piece. Well, before I get to that, let me tell you about why Fred Phelps picketed my church. I started telling the story, didn't finish. What had happened, as you remember, now we discovered this whole thing about Matthew Shepard's a total lie. He was beaten by a homosexual lover over a drug deal gone bad, had a meth shipment. His gay lover wanted it. Matthew Shepard didn't want to give it to him. He got beaten, left for dead in a Wyoming field. Beaten, had a pistol stuck in the back of his head, and wound up dying in a hospital several days later. Hung there for a day before anybody found him. So totally brutal. And by the way, it highlights another tragic pathology of the homosexual lifestyle. Domestic partner violence in the homosexual community is somewhere between 2 and 4 times higher than it is in the heterosexual community. Now, the rate of domestic partner violence is the highest in homosexual partnerships, 2 to 4 times what it is in the heterosexual community. Now, the rate of domestic partner violence is higher among those who are cohabiting in the heterosexual community, much, much higher than it is in with couples that are married. Now, the bottom line is, this is a little bit off topic, but the safest place for a woman to be is in a marriage relationship with her husband. There's something about this. Now, we're not saying that domestic abuse doesn't happen in heterosexual marriages. Of course it does. But if you look at where the risks are, that's the safest place for a woman to be. It's more dangerous for her to be in a cohabiting situation, and it's even increasingly dangerous for her to be in a lesbian relationship. The safest place for a woman to be is in a marriage to a man. Now, anyway, let's see, where was I going with all of this? Oh, yeah. So you got this guy beaten to death by his gay lover brutally, which, again, is one of the pathologies in the homosexual community. When they have domestic violence, man, it gets mean. It gets brutal. It gets vicious. It gets savage. You can see why Adolf Hitler preferred them for his stormtroopers, his enforcers. So we know that the rate of domestic violence is 2 to 4 times higher in the homosexual community. This was a drug deal gone bad. I think Matthew Shepard or his killer had been on a 5-day meth binge. That's why he needed to get a resupply here. When Matthew Shepard wouldn't come across with the drugs, he beat him to death. So everything you know now about Matthew Shepard is wrong. But he entered into the secular world, the gay activist, as a martyr to homophobia. And as I mentioned, when we had a rally in the city of Boise to try to protect the Ten Commandments monument, Fred Phelps' group found out about it. They came to Boise. They presented a proposal to our Parks and Rec Commission. They wanted a memorial, a monument of their own. They say, hey, if you can have your Ten Commandments monument, we want a monument of our own. We want a monument that celebrates the death of Matthew Shepard and identifies his date of death as the date in which he entered into hell. And we want that in your city park. And we're going to sue you if you don't let us have your monument. We are going to sue you. If you're going to have a Ten Commandments monument, we think we have a legal right to have ours. So I was the one that I made a brief set of comments. I talked for several minutes about why this was inappropriate. This is not how we deal with the issue of homosexuality. We don't have any hatred in our hearts for homosexuals. We may disagree with them over the normalization of homosexuality. We do not hate them. We do not want them to go to hell. The last thing in the world we would ever do would be to celebrate somebody's death as the day that they entered into hell. That's not what we're about. That's not what we want to be about as a community. So I was the one that made the motion to turn down Fred Phelps' Matthew Shepard monument. And it passed 12-0 and all that kind of stuff. Well, Fred Phelps, of course, this got back to him that I was the one. I was a pastor. I was an evangelical pastor, a Bible-believing pastor. I'm one of those pastors that believes what the Bible says, that God is exalted above all things, his name and his word. And he got wind of the fact that I was behind the rejection of his Matthew Shepard monument. So they decided they were going to come to the city of Boise, and they were going to picket my church, and they did. It was like in December. It's freezing cold out there. And sure enough, there was a batch of Fred Phelps with their gay-hating signs out there right on the perimeter of our church property. And you know what we did? Number one, we prayed for them because that's what Jesus instructed us to do. And he also teaches us to love our enemies. So what we did, it was a cold, blustery December morning in Boise. And it can get pretty cold in Boise in December. So what we did is I arranged to have some Krispy Kreme donuts and to have some fresh hot coffee served to them out at the edge of the parking lot. They knew what the rules are. They knew they couldn't come on our parking lot or they would be on private property. So they stayed on what was public property, public rights of way. That's where they stayed. And so I had some of our folks take on these trays, take it out to them and set it down on the curb. We knew they wouldn't take it from our hands, but we offered them Krispy Kreme donuts and hot coffee. We set it down on the curb for them while they carried out their protest. And we got these really vile faxes from Fred Phelps calling me all kinds of names that are absolutely, completely unprintable. So they stationed their protest outside our church. And it was interesting. They went to a couple of liberal churches to stage their protests as well. The media covered those protests. The media, nobody showed up at our church because I always already had a reputation as somebody who defended natural marriage and would stand against any effort to compromise or redefine marriage. I had that reputation already in the community. They weren't about to come to my church and show Fred Phelps picketing me because that did not fit their narrative that I was the leading raging homophobe in the Treasure Valley. So I've always found that pretty ironic that I was picketed by Fred Phelps Church for being too pro-gay. Now, if there was ever proof that God has a sense of humor, that would be it. Fred Phelps and his bunch picketed me for being too pro-gay. So anyway, that's how that all went down. You know, in this piece in The Advocate, which is a gay publication, and this is a gay publication, and here's how they start the piece. A new book argues that America's most notorious hate crime was not a hate crime at all. This is a gay publication. This is perhaps the leading gay publication in America. What if nearly everything you thought you knew about Matthew Shepard's murder was wrong? And this is a gay publication. None of this is idle speculation. It's the fruit of years of dogged investigation by journalist Stephen Jimenez. We played the soundbite at the end of the last segment, who is himself gay. In the course of his reporting, Jimenez interviewed over 100 subjects, including friends of Shepard and of his convicted killers, Aaron McKinney and Russell Henderson. Aaron McKinney was his gay lover as well as his partner in drug crime, as well as the killers themselves. In the process, he amassed enough anecdotal evidence to build a persuasive case that Shepard's sexuality was, if not incidental, certainly less central than popular consensus has led us to believe. Well, and the reality is his homosexuality did have something to do with his death because it was his gay lover that killed him. But this primarily was about a drug deal that was gone bad. In the book of Matt goes on this gay advocate piece. Jimenez examines the laudable, if premature, effort on the part of two of Shepard's friends to alert the media to what they believed, falsely it turns out, to be a crime of hate. And the defendants themselves said, look, this is what happened. He came onto us at a bar, and we just flipped out when he came onto us, and that's when we beat him up. And this gay advocate points out the brutal nature of the beating and that's psychotic, not just evil or wicked, but it's psychotic. By several accounts, McKinney had been on a meth bender for 5 days prior to the murder and spent much of October 6th trying to find more drugs. By the evening, he was so wound up that he attacked 3 other men in addition to Shepard. Even Cal Raruka, the prosecutor who had pushed for the death sentence for McKinney and Henderson, would later concede on ABC's 2020 that, quote, it was a murder that was driven by drugs. So in other words, ABC even did a piece on this. ABC did a piece. This is a drug deal gone bad. And here's a paragraph. Let's see. McKinney presents himself as a straight hustler, turning tricks for money or drugs, but others characterize him as bisexual. That means he was gay, was involved in homosexual behavior. A former lover of Shepard's confirms that Shepard and McKinney had sex while doing drugs in the back of a limo that was owned by a shady Laramie figure, Doc O'Connor. Another subject, Elaine Baker, tells Jimenez that Shepard and McKinney were friends who had been in a sexual threesome with O'Connor. A manager of a gay bar in Denver recalls seeing photos of McKinney and Henderson in the papers and recognizing them as patrons of his bar. He recounts his shock at realizing, quote, these guys who killed that kid came from inside our own community. That is inside the homosexual community. Now, here's what this is interesting to me, the way the Advocate, this homosexual publication, closes the piece. Well, it's not the very end, but here's the last paragraph, full paragraph. There are valuable reasons for telling certain stories in a certain way at pivotal times, but that doesn't mean we have to hold on to them once they've outlived their usefulness. Now, notice this is the Muslim doctrine of taqiyya. It was fine for us to turn Matthew Shepard into a martyr, a victim of homophobia, as long as that story was useful. Now they're saying the truth is out. It's no longer useful to use that story, so let's stop telling it. In his book, Flagrant Conduct, Dale Carpenter, a professor at the University of Minnesota Law School, similarly unpicks the notorious case of Lawrence v. Texas, in which the arrest of two men for having sex in their own bedroom became a vehicle for affirming the right of gay couples to have consensual sex in private, except, this is a gay publication saying this, except that the two men were not having sex and were not even a couple. So the entire homosexual movement, the Matthew Shepard thing, Lawrence v. Texas, all of it built on absolute fabricated, bald-faced lies. Focal Point, AFR Talk, back after the news.